Snow drifted across the quiet Montana highway as Mason Cole drove with no real destination in mind. A retired Navy SEAL at 39, he had survived combat zones, night raids, and the kind of losses that never made the news. What he couldn't outrun was the silence waiting for him at home. The cabin felt smaller every week, the nights longer, the memories louder. So when he saw the hand-painted sign for Silver Creek Animal Shelter, he slowed without knowing why, then turned in. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and damp fur. Barks echoed off concrete walls, sharp and desperate. Mason kept his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders tight, eyes scanning like he was clearing a building. Old habits didn't fade. A volunteer with kind eyes greeted him, but he barely heard her. Something down the last row of kennels had caught his attention. A German shepherd sat curled in the corner of a run, head low, ribs faintly visible beneath a dull coat. He didn't bark. Didn't move. Just watched the door with tired amber eyes that held the same distant look Mason saw in his own reflection some mornings. Found wandering near the highway, the volunteer said softly. No chip. No one came looking. Mason crouched slowly. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching but not retreating. For a long moment, neither moved. The world narrowed to shared breathing and unspoken recognition. You been through it too, huh? Mason murmured. The dog stood, hesitant, and stepped closer to the gate. His nose touched the cold metal between them. Something inside Mason shifted. A crack in the armor he'd worn since coming home. Can I take him for a walk? He asked. An hour later they sat outside in the snow. The dog leaned lightly against Mason's leg, not quite trusting, not quite afraid. Shadow, the volunteer had called him. Mason shook his head. Nah, you're not a shadow. He scratched behind one ear. You're Ranger. The name felt right. Strong. Steady. Present. When Mason signed the adoption papers, he told himself he was saving a dog. Driving home with Ranger asleep in the passenger seat, he didn't realize the rescue was already mutual. Life at the cabin changed in quiet, careful steps. The first week, Ranger slept near the door, always facing the exit. Mason gave him space, speaking softly, moving slowly. Trust wasn't built with commands. It was built with consistency. Morning walks turned into long hikes along frozen creeks. Ranger's stride grew stronger each day, his dull coat slowly giving way to a healthy shine. By the second month, he followed Mason everywhere. When nightmares woke Mason in the dark, Ranger would lift his head, ears alert, then rest his chin on the edge of the bed until Mason's breathing steadied. Neither of them spoke about the past, but healing moved between them anyway. One afternoon, Mason tossed a glove into the woods on a whim. Find it? Ranger froze, nose lifting to catch the scent. Seconds later, he disappeared into the trees and returned with the glove held gently in his mouth. Mason stared, impressed. They tried again, then again, each time harder. Ranger never failed. The visit from Montana Search and Rescue came in early spring. 2 handlers stepped out of a marked truck, watching Ranger work with quiet interest. They ran tests Mason barely understood, scent trails, hidden objects, distance alerts. Ranger passed them all with focused intensity. He's not just smart, one of the handlers said. He's wired for this. That night, Mason sat on the porch long after sunset. Ranger rested at his feet, unaware of the decision forming above him. You could save people, Mason whispered. That's bigger than just us. Signing the training transfer papers felt like tearing something open. Ranger would spend a year in advanced search and rescue certification out of state. He'd worked disasters, avalanches, missing persons. Important work. Dangerous work. The morning the truck returned, Ranger hesitated at the door, glancing back at Mason. Mason knelt, gripping his thick fur. Go do something great, partner. Ranger licked his hand once, then stepped forward. The truck disappeared down the snowy road, and the cabin fell silent again. But this time, Mason didn't feel empty. He felt proud. And he counted the days until Ranger would come home. The letter arrived 11 months later. Mason recognized the search and rescue seal immediately. His hands were steady when he opened it, but his chest tightened with every line. Ranger had gone missing during an avalanche response in Colorado. A secondary slide. Broken radio contact. Ongoing search efforts. Missing. Not dead. Missing. Mason read the word over and over like it might change. Snow fell outside, soft and relentless. The same kind of snow that had been falling the day they met. 3 days later he packed a bag. Officials tried to stop him. Weather was unstable. Terrain unpredictable. But Mason had spent a lifetime walking into bad situations for someone he refused to leave behind. He joined volunteer search teams scanning ridges, valleys, tree lines. Days blurred into white wind and aching legs. On the fifth morning, just as hope thinned to a thread, Mason paused on a ridge overlooking a frozen clearing. The air was still, almost fragile. Then he heard it. A single hoarse bark carried on the wind. Mason's heart slammed. "Ranger!" he shouted, voice breaking across the snow. Movement stirred near the tree line. A shape stumbled forward, thin but unmistakable. A German shepherd, fur matted with ice, eyes locked onto him with desperate recognition. "Ranger!" Mason ran downhill, slipping, falling, getting up again. They collided in the snow. Ranger's front paws hit Mason's chest as if afraid he might vanish. Mason wrapped his arms around him, burying his face in rough, familiar fur. "You found me," he whispered, shaking. "You came back." Ranger whined low, tail thumping weakly against the snow. Rescue teams arrived minutes later, drawn by Mason's signal flare, but for a long time neither man nor dog noticed anyone else. The world had narrowed to heartbeat, breath, and the impossible made real. Months later, Ranger officially retired from service. Every evening, Mason and Ranger walked the same trail behind the cabin, side by side, no missions left to chase. They had both served. They had both survived. And now, finally, they were home.